Okay, right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along. And thanks to Katerina, Isadora, the whole team for inviting me back after last year. Still I got the return ticket. And it's wonderful to be here. Now, this is a slightly experimental presentation. You got circulated this piece of writing. I said it wasn't really homework, but actually it was. Have you done your homework? No, you haven't. That's fine. I expect nobody to have read it. I just wanted to put it out there. It's complimentary and informs kind of what I'm doing today, but it's also simply to show you that I can do it like this. I can do this, but now I'm going to do something else. There's that and there's this, but just it's an insecurity thing. So just so you know, we could just dump that now. Okay. Right. So physics and philosophy part 2, the sequel where it all goes badly wrong. Okay, right. Here's the structure, and I'm going to hopefully get through all of that as much as I can. Some bits might be edited out. Okay, so in for said document, which nobody read, or maybe somebody did, and kudos to you, I talked about basically a reversal. Instead of, this is the kind of thing you get from what's called non-standard philosophy, Francois Laruelle, but also I think is found in Henri Bergson's earlier work, this idea of a reversal or reorientation of thought, which also deauthorizes philosophy. Instead of philosophy being a kind of master discipline that you apply to other subjects, philosophy of art, philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics, now there is this reversal, and you look at the object, and philosophy comes out of the object in some way. So there would be a photography of philosophy, for instance, or a choreography or dance of philosophy. And indeed, perhaps even a physics of philosophy or a physicalization of philosophy. So that's the idea from both of those. Now, I can be a bit trite. Oh, so how do we physicalize philosophy? So if you start thinking about existential woes of the myth of Sisyphus, let's start talking about the boulder. What about the boulder? Everyone talks about Sisyphus, but what about the rock that he's rolling up and down? What's it made of? We can start digging down, no pun intended, into its elements, sedentary, metamorphic, granite. Was it recomposed? If you kind of unpack the thought experiment, stroke myth, in detail of what we are being asked to imagine and the implications of that for whatever, human existence or physical existence, perhaps. Maybe we need to look at the circumstances, the physical environment of what is in the thought experiment. But on the other hand, you might say, no, nobody's interested in the boulder. It's just a symbol. It's abstraction. This is what myth and philosophy do. They have these thought experiments, but you don't want to look at them too closely. But of course, some of us do. Here's a quote that's going to come up from a movie in a moment. What does marble think when it's being sculpted? Which is being asked as a serious question. And again, somebody might say, this is all just armchair philosophy, or speculative philosophy, even another name for it, perhaps. But let's not forget about the armchair and posture and thinking with posture, important Nietzschean questions. How do we think when we're walking versus sitting, and what type of thing? So far you might say, so new materialist, perhaps. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but more about my own lack of originality. Speaking of lack of originality, I'm just going to quick background the kind of stuff I've done previously. And of course, I didn't start the stopwatch. There it is, goes. Right. Materializing thought, physicalizing philosophy. I did a lot of work a long time ago now on diagrams or diagrammatology. And the diagram, of course, has a special place, like the thought experiment in much philosophical method, a kind of quasi-concept between saying and showing. But as such, it has neither conceptual essence or definition, nor even a pictorial immediacy in the way that it is, photorealistic, good diagram, should I say. It's an outline. So I tried in one book, Postcolonial Philosophy was called, from nearly 20 years ago, to produce a kind of graphical meta-philosophy, or physical hermeneutics, as I called it, and looking at a number of philosophers of immanence, Deleuze, Alain Badiou, Michel Henry, and good old Francois Laruelle. And any of you familiar with at least Badiou and Deleuze will know how fond, especially Deleuze and Guattari, but also Deleuze on his own, how fond he is of the diagram, very pictorial or sometimes abstract. And I did a kind of way of trying to get these very different philosophies of immanence. They're all pure and absolute. They all say that there's nothing outside of the immanence that they have defined and determined as the matheme in Badiou, the patheme in Kandinsky, the virtual in Deleuze, and so on. And yet, for all of there is no outside, so to speak. And that isn't an appearance or illusion or something. What is inside each of these immanences is very difficult. And it's very, so getting them to collaborate, to discuss with words the tensions in their absolutist claims, their various different types of first philosophy, if you like, was difficult. And I was trying to look at it, well, maybe we can get their diagrams to discuss with each other. And you can have a kind of genealogy of diagrams with obviously cones involving not only the main protagonists like Badiou, those are kind of diagrams from Badiou, but also Merleau-Ponty, Lacan, and Bergson in the background. And so that's one way, I'll just mention quickly, one way I've tried to physicalize philosophy, materialize thought. Another one is in film and philosophy. Now, firstly, I'm going to go to one particular example of this, but you can even look at film studies and what they say. What is the essence of cinema? From different points of view, all cinema is ultimately this, the Deleuzian or Stanley Cavell or the Zizekian, etc., etc. And again, you get, it's difficult to reconcile in terms of their written textual claims. But in terms of the visuality, there's interesting things you can look at. This is Altman's 2 diagrams of film theory. He's already gone meta there. The late David Bordwell's model film experience, Ed Brannigan's meta-theoretical diagrams, and you can have a look at those. And this is something I also did in that book. But then focusing in on one particular film, I tried to get, the last book was slightly unsatisfactory to me because it was still, it used diagrams to a degree, but it's still very textual. It was still, describing and assessing and analyzing film theories. Here I wanted the structure of a book, still a book in text form, to be more informed by a cinematic principle structure. And so I had to write a book, an introduction to Francois Laruelle and his non-standard philosophy. This is from 2015. A difficult thing to do, especially if you try to explain it in terms of only philosophical context. Oh, he's got this, there's a bit of Derrida, there's a bit of Ravesson, there's a bit of Spinoza in the background, etc., maybe Marx and so on. Because in that sense, given what Laruelle is trying to do is produce a non-standard philosophy, a philosophy or a thinking or a practice of thinking that does not fall into the traps of being one more master discourse, which is what he thinks of philosophy as a master discourse, inherently transcendent. Obviously, you've got to nuance this, but these are his claims. And so I couldn't simply just introduce him through philosophy. I needed to introduce him, well, I felt I needed to introduce him in different ways. And so I used the idea of taking a film and the notion of a film remake. When a film is made and then it is remade and remade and remade, something interesting is going on. It's not just being duplicated. There's a famous Psycho remake in 1998. Look, the director's just gone. Can anyone remember? Lars von Trier, no, Lars von Trier. De Bont. No, it's not De Bont. Anyway, it'll come to me afterwards. 1998, he made a shot-for-shot remake of Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960. The only differences being it's in color, different actors, obviously, to play the main protagonists, 1 or 2 insert shots, slightly different, but otherwise, the dialogue, the framing, the soundtrack, everything is the same, camera movements. But interestingly, it was regarded not as a remake. You might say, but surely this is the most faithful remake, but rather it was some sort of bizarre experiment, a replica, rather than a genuine remake. So the interesting thing of, well, what makes a remake if it's not a duplicate, it's not a facsimile? It has to be different, but the same in some way to have that source. So the remake of a film is an interesting thing. So I was kind of introducing Laruelle through different remakes of Laruelle. 5 different introductions through 5 different routes, none of which is in a sense, again, the master route, the key to understanding Laruelle. That was the idea. And so I used as the structuring device, somewhat out of fashion these days, Lars von Trier and his film, The 5 Obstructions, which has as a theme, and basically Lars von Trier goes to his old mentor at the Danish School of Film, Jürgen Leth, who back in the 60s made this film called The Perfect Human, or Perfect Mensch. It's a little 15-minute comical pseudo-anthropological study of what is a human being. And in The 5 Obstructions, if you've ever seen it, von Trier thinks of it as a beautiful film, a perfect film, that he now wants Leth, his mentor, and still making films, to ruin it 5 times. He gives him these creative constraints. Like, for instance, he has to remake it, but it has to be remade as a cartoon. He has to, and both Leth and von Trier hate cartoons, and they know that, and that's why it's a creative constraint. He has to make it, but there has to be a cut every 12 frames. A cut every 12 frames. That's every half a second. That would induce an epileptic fit. How is he going to do that? And also, one of the worst constraints is that he has to make it with no constraints at all. Total, absolute freedom. And anyway, so in that basically exercise, I tried to take then these features, editing, animation. There was also the notion of style, pure externalism. One of the remakes is this cliched romantic spy intrigue, etc., set in Brussels and so on and so on. Absolutely vapid cinema de look type film, although I do like some cinema de look, that he remakes it as. And that allows me to then, in a sense, a way into looking at Laruelle as a behaviorist. Not in the kind of positivist sense, reductive sense, but a behaviorist of philosophy, looking at the externality of philosophy. I could look at, through editing, the question of visual inference and paraconsistency and democracy, the democracy of thought, that all thoughts are equal, hence the title of the book, which is a kind of way of thinking of Laruelle's attempt to dethrone philosophy as the master discourse, and not replace it with any other. All discourses are equal. And there's nuance to that, but I discussed that in the first paper, if you are interested. So that was one way, using one film, rather than film theories of different films, to, in a sense, materialize, physicalize, and introduce a thinker like Laruelle. So, okay, fair enough. That's the old stuff. So now some new stuff, which is mostly, so far you've had just me talking about stuff I've done, and well, but I want to talk about what I'm doing right now. And so we're going to start with comedy, which is always a good way to do it, looking over to
is this, right?
Okay,
no, this is trying to be this.
I've introduced. What?
Why don't you pay?
No, I just wanted to use them.
Ah, okay.
Stuart Lee, British stand-up comedian, very meta. Doesn't tell jokes, really. He doesn't do that. He can't tell a joke. I can write a paper, but he chooses not to. What he will do is sometimes he will tell a joke and then explain how awful it was to tell a joke. He's demeaned, but he had to appeal to a certain part of the audience. It was just like that kind of thing. Most of his performance for the rest of the audience, that's what it's all about. So he's very meta in that way. You might say a philosophical darling as a stand-up comedian because he is very reflexive about what he's doing. But what's interesting is that even as he is talking about the joke he just made, insulting the abilities of his audience to understand the joke, actually he has not left the performance. all of that outside, that's where he jumps out from. It's not pouring anymore, he's commenting on the performance. That is the performance. He is still in the performance. And you only realize later on, that was all the joke. So everyone is in on the joke at the end. But what's interesting is the fluidity of inside and outside. It's going inside, jumping in and out of what is the performance and what is not the performance. And this is a little interview with another comedian, Chris Morris. That's sort of bookends. I've got two pieces here. One that starts at the beginning of one of the televised shows, and then one of the jokes, and then we come back to this discussion, an interview with another comedian about, well, what the hell is he doing? What is his thing? Now,
is this, right?
No, this is trying to be this and failing.
It's not failing to be this. This is this. This is this. You know, I've been finding it much. And I think it's partly because I don't do anything. I just do gigs or look after kids. I mean, I don't want to do what all the other comics of my age do, which is to just sort of come out and remember their childhood in a regional accent. Hey, do you remember Gripping Hands Action Man? I know I had one of them, Gripping Hands Action Man. I say Gripping Hands, it was the 1970s, it was more like Wandering Hands Action Man. But we mustn't judge Action Man by the values of today. Note how my attempt at a parody of generic Live at the Apollo nostalgia material is in of itself superior to the real thing. But still, the years pass, the call never comes. So, well, I'll do some remembering childhood stuff, because it's a sort of a generic thing of stand-up. People normally enjoy this, so yeah, it's not that. They can say it is this, but it is. This is it.
You spent 25 years honing your craft, and you're just reduced to saying this is
this, yeah.
and you can't even really prove that, can you? You just have to insist that this is this. You've written loads of material and you've done loads and loads of gigs all over the country, and the best you can offer anyone is what I'm saying is this is this.
People sitting at home going, "Oh, look at that! It isn't that." I go, "It is that."
How do you know? That's a straw man. Who on earth is sitting at home going, "Look at that! It isn't that." What evidence have you got? They might be. So I'm going to build a whole career to refute what I imagine somebody might be thinking.
This.
I might, yeah.
This is this.
You keep saying that. It doesn't sound any better.
There's all sorts of things they can do. This is how we get it now.
This is hang on, but is this happening? What is? I've lost track of what this is now.
Well,
last time this happened, I felt I should intervene. Now I feel I've literally got no tools to deploy.
again, 2 years of work.
So it's the
2 years of work. I've been to gigging like 6 months a week for 2 years to get all this together. People go, "Oh, it's not as good as the."
So yes, it's the kind of the opacity of the indexable, the demonstrative. It's this, and it's happening. He's kind of falling into an abyss of, because even this interview is performance. It's part of the comedy that he's commenting, and the abyss of not being able to say, well, what is it that we're doing or that you do? It's this, and so on and it goes. So I'm interested in. The this as a bona fide, albeit indefinite. That kind of refers back to the other paper, but don't worry about it. An undefined level of PHYSIS. The punchline kind of gone straight to the end of the talk. This is whatever this is. Don't just follow my finger. Obviously, you can if you want to. It's one good thing. I remember being in a Paris conference and with a leading Deleuzian. And she was saying what the actuality was. And it's this. It's this. This is actuality. I don't, well, what are you pointing? Whatever. I was like Max the dog. Oh, that's good, good. Cats don't understand pointing. I'm looking at the finger, but anyway, that apparently was actuality. Who am I to say it wasn't? Okay. So here's another insecurity gesture. I have written books before, as you can see. I can do that, but I'm doing this. So Also, that's a quote from Bergson. A philosopher worthy of any has never said more than a single thing, and even then is something he has tried to say rather than actually said. I think that kind of sums up my washed up career as I come to the end. Run out of ideas. No, I'm not fishing, don't worry. That's part of it. Don't worry, don't do it. I'm washed up, lacking ideas, post ideas, and say. And of course repeating myself, as I have to do, because I said it last year, and I'm saying it again this year. And if I didn't, then it wouldn't have been true. So. Okay. But one thing, to summarize this 25 years or whatever it was, doing gigs and writing stuff, I feel like it's come down to this notion, and this will be key in, and I talked about it more last year, and a bit of it's in the paper, but it's this notion of the hyperbolic and the supernormal, which I've got a little bit of reading here, though, because I speak too quickly and this will help. And exit, as I see it, this binary, if you want to, from another duality, a stark duality of the natural and supernatural, or of the normal and paranormal, offering a paradigm that thinks only in terms of differences of degree rather than of kind, though you might not like the quality quantity thing and talk about that as well. The category of the supernatural, say, last time I talked a lot about ghosts, and I will again. As found in arts, culture, philosophy, and even science, spooky physics, Gerald Edelman called it, is re-rendered as structural, a projected inconsistency or hyperbolic state of the natural, a placeholder for any outside whatsoever, a liminal position that must be occupied by some one thing or property. Down in the technology and so on. We're going to reveal it, the double act. Okay. Yep. Okay. So, as I was talked about last time, the ghost as memory is a kind of ghost or a real continuity of survival in part. So, the paranormal, spooky, supernatural, etc., in this type of revisioning is brought down to earth through a double maneuver. First, there is the seeming naturalistic reduction. The ghost seen as merely a memory reduction. Okay, ghosts are just memories. But then there is a second reduction whereby the ghost memory itself is inflated as a real part of the past. And you could call that the reduction of the reduction. The part or memory is not an unreal representation of the past, but from an immanentist point of view, an immanent fragment of the past surviving in what looks like a hyperbolic state as an apparent exception or inconsistency, a ghost, with all of that immaterial and spectral aspect. The past is merely my memory, merely, first reduction, my memory becomes my memory as the real past in part. This notion of part, the memoryological relation of part and whole is kind of working there, and I talked about that last time and a bit in the paper. Hence, this partiality is a difference of degree only, not a substantial one in kind. Come on. Is it? Yeah, no, it's good. We're good. Example 2. Now, time travel. That's where I want to go. Steve, don't go. So, time travel as mental time travel. Now, in psychological studies, the faculties of anticipation, the future, memory of the past are known as mental time travel. And there's been a lot written lately about time travel. And I've been interested in this. I just want to say I've been interested in it before it became trendy. I just want to say that. And in as much as obviously if you study Bergson, you're interested in the difference between clock time and duration, etc., etc. But I've also been interested in that notion of so-called mental time travel, let's say memory of the past, as not merely a representation. And therefore, the distinction between a kind of objective time travel, where you get into a machine, something transcendent to you, outside, you get in the machine and somehow, magically, the machine takes you to a point in the calendar from the past, clock time, if you like, to use a Bergsonian term. So, of course, our experience of the phenomenology of the flow of time goes in one direction, so it would seem. But and I'm gonna not go into that too deeply. But it might be possible if you get away from this notion that there is a transcendent singular time, Newtonian time, that flows equally everywhere, clock time, as Bergsonists would call it, to this notion of multiple durations, different planes that interfere. They interfere with each other, and you can, in a sense, hitch lift on slower durays in order to slow down your duration or accelerate yourself. Not necessarily into an objective future or an objective past, because from the Bergsonian point of view, they don't exist. Those are abstractions. And there are, of course, physical systems that run at different durations. And you can, in a sense, allow those or attempt to allow those durations to interfere with your own. And that's where I'm going to eventually get to. A little bit of Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance, but in this time, it's going to be time travel and the art of classic car restoration. Maybe you saw that coming. I don't know. Yeah. So, and all of this obviously works within this notion of supernormal, taking the normal and seeing how it is already weird, so to speak, but without it putting it in any kind of fringe experience. It is just reviewing it again through an immanentist perspective. And going through the stuff I've written in the past, I've seen, you know, as you get to a certain age, you get a vista on what you have done all this time. And it's just this, the hyperbolic and the supernormal, the this and the that. That's basically what I've been at, I think. And so now I'm going to change gear, so to speak. Obviously, you know about cars are coming, so it's a pun. Right, okay. Changing gear. Bergson on sympathy. So there's some lovely lines in Bergson, such as a definition of sympathy, which isn't intersubjective or interhuman in any way. It is where one is transported into the interior of an object, in order to coincide with what there is unique and consequently inexpressible in it. So here he's sounding like a bit like a new materialist. He talks about the life of things, the becoming, which is the life of things. And to understand that, you have to practice this new type of empirical, a contradiction in terms perhaps, an empirical metaphysics, a metaphysics which is simply about deepening your perception of things and becoming sympathetic to the life of things, the duration of things. Doing that, he says, involves some violence, reversing, and this is, I'm going to talk a lot about reversals and reorientations as I did at the start, and the background, and mirrors. Reversing the direction of the operation by which the mind ordinarily thinks, continually upsetting its categories or rather recasting them. And in so doing, we arrive at fluid concepts, capable of following reality in all its windings and of adopting the very movement of the inner life of things. This is a definition. To philosophize means to reverse the normal direction of the workings of thought. Now, I'm interested in then, if its sympathy is, in a sense, a reversal and an orientation towards the life of things, the object, and then vis-a-vis cars, which is something I've always been fascinated by, vehicles, and what this notion, there's a phrase known as mechanical sympathy. It doesn't mean you're an engineer or you know exactly how everything works, but you have a certain sense of how mechanics work, machines work, and technology works. 100% talk about that later. Before I get into that, another bit of cinematic physicalization, the background. I've written about this in the context of Japanese horror cinema of the late 90s, early noughties, like The Grudge and Ringu, The Ring, where it was interesting what was happening optically in cinema. I think philosophically interesting, where suddenly the background becomes a protagonist. It becomes a kind of optical horror. Now, horror has always been about optics in one respect, about what you can see and what you cannot see, kind of smoke and fog, etc., things that are slightly out of shot, too much close-ups, etc. But here it becomes very clear. It's kind of playing on the whole figure-ground situation of focus in a lens and in framing, where suddenly nobody gets in these shots straight away, so maybe there, and nobody is harmed yet. But there is menace there. But it's the background itself as background, not when it becomes foreground and chokes you to death or whatever. But it's as background that it becomes antagonistic. So it's a kind of almost pure I don't like the use of the word pure, but very cinematic type of horror that the Japanese horror brought into vogue for a while. And I wrote about it. And now I'm thinking about it now well, again, I could continue with the whole film theory direction and talk about interior core mirrors. Interior core mirrors. That's an interior core mirror, an old one. And if you maybe you can guess some of the shots there. Hurry up again. Guess that shot. I think it's No Country for Old Men. Top right is definitely Taxi Driver, and so on and so forth. So, interior car mirrors. Firstly, filmmakers love cars. It's a great kind of captive space for protagonists to debate and talk. And you can have, obviously, there are road journey cars, road films, where somebody goes from Los Angeles to New York and adventures ensue, dramatic, violent, comedic, romantic, etc. But even outside of that genre, the particular road film genre, there is just that mise en scène, the situation of a car. It's perfect. You've got two people, they have to talk to each other, etc. And it's also a frame. It's the car screen is a perfect cinematic, or at least widescreen framing device. And of course, then the rear view mirror, and you don't have to get all Zizek and Hitchcock and split personality in them. You can talk about multiple personalities and reflections, but it's just a multiple framing device. You've got the mirror, the car mirror, and of course the cinema screen itself that you're looking through, or your widescreen TV or what have you, that creates this mise en abîme, as you say. And I'm interested in that, partly just as, okay, you can exercise and have a look at reflection in that mirror. There's another few shots. Speaking of Psycho, top right, that's poor Miss Crane on her last journey. To this lovely French film, Jean Cocteau's Orphée. I think we don't have to have the clip. I will just scroll. So Orphée, Cocteau's retelling of the Orpheus legend. In his version, Orpheus is a modern day French poet, but he's run out of ideas. He's washed up. The youth, the new generation of poets don't respect his work. He's too famous. He's become bourgeois. He's not producing new, and he knows it himself. Anyways, as with the original myth, of course, what happens is his wife, Eurydice, dies. He goes to the underworld, brings her back, but the deal is he must not look back at her. And also this has biblical references and so on like that going on there, perhaps. But this is the thing. She is back on condition that he does not look back at her or see her face and so on. But what is happening at the same time is when he goes there, he meets his death, played as a beautiful princess, who is death. And she travels around in a Rolls-Royce silver wraith, wraith meaning ghost, of course, with two rather ominous motorcyclists. So we have in Orphée very much the mythic narrative, a story of the afterlife, the underworld, death, return, spirits, ghosts, but it's all played in this materialistic manner, physicalized with motorbikes, cars, what looks like washing up gloves to get you through into the underworld. You go through a mirror and so on like that. It's very mundane and banalized. Even there is a kind of banality of the bureaucracy to how death and punishment is given to people in the underworld. So I'm interested in that. And here's that quote. This is Orphée played by Jean Marais. What does marble think when it's being sculpted? This is where that line came from. Death, he's brought back, and he brings it back, but he's also inherited the princess's Rolls-Royce, which he becomes obsessed with. Why? Because through its radio is being transmitted various cryptic, quasi-poetic phrases, like the bird sings with its fingers and things like that. which is much nicer in French. And I won't play the clip now. I don't think that would be a good idea. But basically, there's a lot of that going on. He becomes obsessed with the car. He doesn't, to visit him, his wife has to go into the back of the car, the rear, but he can't look at her, of course. He has to keep away, otherwise she's dead again, etc. So we have a lot of notice, nothing matters but this car and so on and so forth. But then, of course, I won't show the clip, he looks in the rear view mirror. The rear view mirror catches him out. He sees her reflection. That's the shot of her just before she disappears. So what happens then is complicated, no spoiler alerts, but he goes back again to retrieve her. Or does he? Is it not actually because he has fallen in love with the princess? He's fallen in love with his death, because of course poets love the idea of death and so on. So a lot, the symbolism, of course, going on here. But what's also interesting is how Cocteau has made it so mundane in terms of the paraphernalia of a car. A Rolls-Royce really is the center, one of the central figures of the car. Okay, don't know how I'm doing for time, but that is a spurious link to, therefore, Pirsig. Often denounced as a kind of a para-academic, not a serious academic. But he's got some interesting things in that type of new age thinking in the 70s. And this notion harks back to my earlier paper of the holy lodi, of indefinability, this notion of quality, which is trying to get between subject and object, the classic dualities, but also go beyond any of the anti-mechanistic thoughts of Romanticism, both the dualities of classicism and the anti-mechanism of Romanticism, that there is something in physical objects and in the maintaining of a physical object like a motorbike, right? There is something, here we go, in the duration of a motorbike, the materials that it has, that can do something to us. I can't find it, doesn't matter. Anyway, so he talks about this notion of quality as something that cannot be defined. But he goes in particular to talk about, I had a little screw in my bag, and I'll find it later, but it doesn't matter that much. He talks a lot about stuckness, like Orpheus, who says he's stuck, he cannot produce any new poetry, etc. So he starts cribbing ideas from the radio in the car and then writing them down. It turns out that those ideas are actually from another younger poet who had already died, so he's a plagiarist, despite himself. But what's interesting is this, and here's the kind of where I try to tie loosely these things together, is that when a screw, he talks about a particular type of flat plane screw, not a Phillips screw, a screw that gets stuck in a particular part of a motorbike. And the thing is that if you turn the screw too hard, you strip the threads of the screw, and you can actually ruin the flat head of it. Yes, the drive, it's called there. And it's stuck. The screw won't come out. And you might try every single thing, drill it out, etc., etc. It's just getting worse and worse. Now, he doesn't give the definitive, oh, this is how you get a screw out. It's not. A friend of mine once did buy, she was a motorbiker and bought this and said it's useless. It doesn't teach us a lot about life, but very little about motorcycle maintenance. But of course, it is good at this idea of life, the life of the motorcycle, so to speak, and its parts and its materiality. So, and how to think through the screw. So basically, he says, this is the zero moment of consciousness. You don't know what you're doing, what you're up against is the great unknown, the void of all Western thought, this screw moment that you can't get out. Screws are cheap, but at this point, the motorcycle as such is valueless if you can't get this screw out. And then he puts, and this is where I've kind of honed in, we're still stuck on the screw. And the only way to get it being unstuck is by abandoning further examination of the screw according to the traditional scientific method. That won't work. What we have to do is examine traditional scientific method in the light of the stuck screw. So that to me is the reversal instead of thinking of using all of our knowledge and applying it to the screw as the problem of the object, think through the screw outwards, the materiality of the screw. And sort of things going on there. And I had a problem too myself. So this is an old wing mirror, sorry, interior mirror from a car, which I've acquired. And I needed to get a screw not out, but try to get a screw in, and to basically to get the whole thing tight. It was just going to be floppy, and how to tighten it up, etc., etc. And also, of course, because that's my way, I was trying to, having been reading Pirsig at the same time, I was thinking, you know, this is interesting. This is a philosophical problem. I start to think from the point of view of the screw. So what does that mean in terms of, you know, I can't get it to, etc., etc. But the problem was that it was a very easy solution. I just had to tighten it a little bit more. I just wasn't tightening it enough. It wasn't really a problem. I was making a problem because I wanted to, you know, use it as a philosophical object, so to speak. As in, rather than just say, actually, it's not a problem, I just need to tighten it more, and then it doesn't flop, which was disappointing because I thought I was going to get a chapter out of this at least, etc. But this is, I think, interesting in as much as we get back to this notion of sympathy and mechanical sympathy. In Pirsig's example, it wasn't like the one in mine. Mine was a simple, just tighten it. His was much more about focusing on the screw. But maybe mine would have been too, if I just looked at the screw as a screw, rather than as a philosophical problem to illustrate Pirsig. I just look at it as, oh, it just needs to be tightened. Then again, game over. Okay, so last section. I've lost a bit of time, so I hope you're going to be nice to me. Yes.
You have to fill that.
Oh, yeah. Well, what time is it now? Oh, 15 minutes. Okay. We lost a bit of time. Okay. So old cars. So the idea is this. Getting to restore old cars as a way of interfering with different durations and materialities of plastic and metal and so on and so forth. And as examples of entropy. This is an interesting chap, Michael Freulich, a German used car dealer, so to speak. That's kind of the unpolite phrase, used car dealer, but he's a classic car broker. But he's an interesting chap, originally a photographer in the 1970s. I have some interesting stories about him that I won't speak. That wouldn't be fair to him anyway. But he's a really interesting guy. Photographer turned classic car broker. But he's obviously a man of means because at one point, about 20 years ago, he bought 50 classic cars and put them into the forest to decay. At the same time, as top right, he runs a classic car showroom. All of these beautiful Mercedes and Porsches and old Jaguars, perfectly maintained, in a sense, reversing the entropy. We can talk about that, if that's a proper reversal or not, but reversing the entropy there. But here, you might say accelerating it, putting it in amongst the trees, and we know what trees are like, etc. Maybe that wasn't very nice to the trees, be leaking poisons and so on. But you can visit this type of classic car graveyard where they've now trees are going to growing into them, and it's quite moving in a way. Because basically the thing is, yes, you can restore a car, you can slightly slow down the process, but it'll still decay. It'll still go to dust and rust in the end. This, by the way, this is Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. If you can see closely, a complete rust bucket, which he drives to work every day. He's been on TV and so on. It doesn't matter. It's rusting around him, but it still functions perfectly well. But he could drive something glossy if he so wished. So yes, so this, in a sense, I'm interested. This is kind of a new diagram of Bergson versus the tyranny of clock time, the authority of the now, a singular transcendent Newtonian now, where every other now is simultaneous. And instead, this idea of multiple durations, tiered, leveled, laminated, if you like, and multiple, that you get with Bergson's theory of time. And I'm, in a sense, thinking of car maintenance and physical objects like cars and motorbikes in that fashion. So not through Newton's absolute time, I'll skip this one. And speaking of which, so here we go. I've got a business opportunity for all of you. Take one and pass it on. So Jack Finney is a science fiction writer, wrote in the 1950s a science fiction story called Second Chance about a guy who restores a Jordan Playboy in 1920s, not a brand you know of anymore, the Jordan Playboy, a 1920s coupe, and he acquires it. It's a rust bucket. He restores it so perfectly that when he goes and drives it out in the evening one night, he's back in 1920 something, and then begins he meets his future parents-in-law and things like that. It's kind of Back to the Future. It predates Back to the Future, but and it's told as a science fiction temporal paradox story, of course. But it's interesting as much as here, unlike in Back to the Future, the DeLorean is a time machine. You just get in it. It's, you know, it has some sort of magic mechanism. It gets you back to 1950, whenever. Here, the story set in the 50s brings you back to the 1920s through the Restoration Act, through an extension of the person's body into the materialities and durays of the car, etc. So, of course, then I decided, well, I'll set up a company that does more of that, called Second Chances. And as you can see, we do car restoration and time travel services. But we'll work on more than just cars. Any old objects that you wish and you have fond feelings for, we'll try and restore. In actual fact, I've changed the subtitle. It's now Restorations, Temporal Repairs and Imaginary Solutions. Because when I introduced this idea to some friends, they thought, well, one, I've gone mad, and two, am I literally traveling in time back in some Doctor Who kind of craziness? And I say, no, it's not actual time travel. It's mental time travel, but understood from a Laruelian non-standard perspective, which of course they also think, well, that just sounds more like more nonsense, but whatever. So, come on. So in a sense, this might be regarded as a kind of extended memory project. We have the notion of extended mind, 4E cognitivism, embodiment, embedment, enactedness, etc. 4E cognition is often, I've looked at some of the literature, often is focusing on perception, the extension of the mind through the body and through tools and so on, and in different ways, as a perception of a present. But what if, and the notion of extended memory hasn't been explored so much. There are a few things that talk about the environment and the environmental as a way of extending memory with the same prosthetics. So this is what I'm interested in. It's not nostalgia, a representation of the past, but rather through that Bergsonian guy's kind of defragmentation of multiple past parts or pluralization. It's also a supernormal thing going on there. Now we can discuss, maybe this will be the first question, but surely, John, you're not genuinely bringing the car back to the past in any way, partial or as a whole, because the car is not a closed system that if you just kind of add new bits to, you've suddenly brought it back to an earlier state in its thermodynamic balance. It's not a closed system. So you might question exactly what is being restored, as with Theseus's ship. Is it the same ship? Is it the same car at all that is being restored? If new copper, new rubber, new plastics, what have you, is being put onto it? So, or is it merely only appearances? And you can guess when I put a scare quotes around only, of course. Yes, it is appearances, but they are partially real, and that's just the way it is. Okay, so it's all part of this kind of Bergsonian against the mastery of now, against the master discourse, to sound like Laruelle, of now, or Newtonian time. So in that way, a classic car becomes a time capsule, but without actually travel. We can't turn back time in general, clock time, because of the second law of thermodynamics, the old story. You know, the milk is not coming out of the coffee once it's been stirred in. That's just the way it is. But there are other vectors in time, other durations that can interfere with us. And we might be able to hitch a lift, so to speak, slow up or accelerate our own duration. which is itself multiple. Of course, it's not that we are a singular object either. So repairing and maintaining such an object might extend and slow down duration. So basically, yes, I bought a car from the crazy German, as you do, with what little money I did. Now, what did I buy? A Rolls-Royce. So I've got an old Rolls-Royce from 1980, which is a very interesting car. Now, you say, oh, right, so here, how to lose your audience in one slide. Oh, that's... So we impoverished students who saved all year to get here are listening to some guy saying, oh, he's nearly retired and he's buying Rolls-Royces. Let me just say, that Rolls-Royce was once the most expensive car in the world. Now, it's worth less than a Toyota Corolla. That's an interesting fact. Lots of interesting things. It was also regarded as the best car in the world. Some people say, as in, yes, one crap car is 2005. It proves that the super rich have a sense of humor. And some people think it's the ugliest car in the world. Some people think, like me, it's very beautiful. I don't know what that's an interesting thing. We can talk about aesthetics, etc. The most expensive, dirt cheap. It's normally people think of Rolls-Royces as curvaceous and kind of neoclassical in their style. But this was designed by Italians, the only Rolls-Royce ever designed by Pininfarina, a very modernist 70s design house. They usually work with other companies like Ferrari, etc. And so proper Rolls-Royce, I don't actually like the look of most Rolls-Royces, but that one, yes, because it has that Italian brutalist, simple 70s linearity, flat surfaces to it. That some people think make it ugly. I think it makes it beautiful. But I think it's an interesting curio to restore. Even the name, it's called the Camargue, which was used to evoke like the Corniche, another model, the exotic south of France. It turns out that the Camargue is a salt marsh. It's got flamingos, it's got lovely white horses. It's also got an awful lot of mosquitoes. But here's the thing, that's a kind of reduction. Oh, it's called the Camargue. That sounds wonderful, south of France. But actually, it's a salt, brine water, salt marshland. But it's beautiful. It's actually a beautiful part of France as well, near Arles and so on. So it's kind of reduction, and then a reduction of the reduction, you get back to it. It doesn't have to be all Côte d'Azur. So the car, I'm not going to go on, I'm going to skip these things you can talk about with the Rolls-Royce. It needs restoration. It's falling apart inside. That's on me. And this is part of the exercise in maintaining something old and halting your durations and so on. Other things you could talk about, the famous grille of Rolls-Royce, uses entasis. All of them do, just as the original Greeks. The symbol of Rolls-Royce, of course, is both the spirit of ecstasy and entasis, of course. Which is basically bending things, making things imperfect in order so that they appear perfect, like the columns. If you didn't do it to a temple or columns, if you didn't slightly bend them in, you would see them bent out. Even though if they're actually straight, they look bent out. If you bend them in, they look straight. So it's an interesting, philosophers can make stuff about that. The imperfection in order to create perfection. Or another one, famous interior woodwork is burr walnut. Oh, very nice burr walnut. Burr walnut is basically cancerous. They are tumors on trees that are then used in a certain way in order to create this beauty. But they are deformations of growth. And again, lots to talk about there. Okay, conclusion. Okay, I'm going to stop now. Right on time. Okay, no. Good. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm not done. I'm just coming to the conclusion. All right. You're easing into my conclusion time. Okay. Right. Sorry. So I'm not specifying, like in the original paper, which nobody read. That's fine. I'm not specifying what levels really are, but only that they are indefinite. And as I explained in part one, to be any more specific or definite is to define a part or level, and so also a system of parts or levels, rather than simply hypothesize an experiment. Or what Laruelle calls a fiction and Bergson, I think this is on the slide. Bergson calls a suggestion, what I'm doing now, which is also a pataphysical practice. You may have spotted that. That is what we're doing. Let's go back. Where's the goddamn pataphysical? What happened to that slide? I went too fast. There we go. Right, sorry. So Alfred Charret, basically,
Yeah.
as Yuval, a participant last time, pointed out to me, this is a bit like pataphysics, what you do. It wasn't this talk, it was something else. The use of humor and comedy and all the rest of it as a kind of philosophical subject as well. But yeah, Albert Jarret was also interested in constructing time machines using bicycles, of course. And his notion of in a sense, traversing metaphysics and physics with pataphysics, imaginary solutions that produce creatively something like the bicyclist time machine, a little picture from Tati and Jure de Fête there. However, I would add, and I've used imaginary solutions as a subtitle to my new company, and you can all buy shares one day if you were to lose money. However, solutions I wouldn't say are merely imaginary. We have to understand the imaginary not as representation, but as a real part of the past, imminently understood and supernormalized. Okay, so now then I can go back. Right, so to this. So back to Stuart Lee then. So the performance of what is inside and outside, I discussed that earlier. But if this is the notion that if we can't define, there are myriad levels, but to define a level and to contain it as a kind of closed system or even quasi-closed system and say that that is what is happening is shall we say, premature. I'm not going to say untenable. The thisness, I think, of what we do, gesturing again, the thisness of this that we do, as opposed to that, is also part of PHYSIS. It is another level of nature. It has its own duration, multiple and involving interferences from different material sources, old cars, motorbikes, screws, wing mirrors, interior mirrors, and all the rest. And I'll just then finish. Well, I didn't get into Dorothy, but anyway, don't worry about that. I'll finish then with a quote from Deleuze and Guattari, which is, nice, pity, where I put the emphasis, as you can see, on the word this. Perhaps this is the supreme act of philosophy. Not so much to think the plane of immanence, and this notion of planes, of course, he partially gets from Bergson and levels, as to show that there is unthought in every plane, and to think it in this way as the outside and inside of thought, as Stuart Lee is going inside and outside all the time, as the not external outside and the not internal inside, and that which cannot be thought and yet must be thought. Okay. So far, so again, very Deleuzian, Guattarian, philosophical, and so on. But I'm hoping to do more of this practice and eventually drive my Rolls-Royce and give rides to people for €5 a time. Anyway, that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
The question is why, and I don't mean this in a critical way, but I am just curious, why would we do this? I mean, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to be critical or provocative, but I mean, can you motivate this act a little bit more? I mean, I get it in the history of philosophy, transcendence and immanence. I do see how this performative gesture is a type of immanence. It overlaps with some things in performative new materialism. Like I'm feeling lots of synergy with what you're saying, but I feel like I'm missing a piece of motivation of why we would look at the world from the perspective of a screw, which again, I'm on board with, but from a different, I don't know, I just want to hear your thoughts about the motivation.
Right. Okay, well, it doesn't provide us with a political program which we can enact in any, coherent way, for instance, as let's say advocates for Badiou. Why are we interested in set theory? Why are we, etc.? Well, set theory gets you to Marxism, gets you to revolution, etc., etc. So the political program. This you might regard as inherently idiosyncratic. I am motivated to it. I'm not like, are you interested in screws or cars or motorbikes? That's the contingency of your biography. Contingency of my biography is that I am. And I'm interested in rubber and why it falls apart the way it does after a certain age and so on. And thinking about that rather than writing more books about other philosophers thinking about that is what I'm interested in doing at the moment. So I'm not going to project it onto as in, well, this is a program for improving society. You know, improve society in lots of different ways, give more to charity or this or that or the other, or join the revolution. That's one way. Mine is idiosyncratic, you might say, internalist, personalist. That kind of aggrandizes it a bit. Well, it's kind of existential personalism, but it is partly that. But understanding the person as an extended thing. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you might have a thought and you understand this as you know well yourself better when you've written it, and then you've written it for an audience, so on. But if the thought is about screws and interior mirrors and so on, sometimes you just have to play with the interior mirror or the screw or the car, etc., to understand the thought better as well. Just as writing is a practice, I've done a lot of writing and I'm going to do something with rubber and plastic and chrome. That's my motivation, but I'm not going to pretend that it is, you know, transferable to anybody else.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I wasn't trying to get something. I'd be like, you know, how is this going to get us to communism or something like that? That wasn't my intent. And there's lots of reasons that I think point to here. But the one that is striking me the most is that it is not doing history of transcendent stuff. You know, it is not committed to that. So in some ways, the initial motivation seems a negative one, which is just reacting to not, how do we get outside of this problematic historical transcendence and do something that's different and doesn't fall into that trap? And that's a good motivation, but it's also a negative. So I just wanted to hear the positive one. And it could be aesthetic or, as you say, personal, existential, like those all make sense to me. So thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering, I kind of want to bounce off of what Thomas just said, or asked, but, and although different in the sense that it's an idiot question, but, you know, so yes, all thoughts that are equal. What about all PHYSIS? Is that all of PHYSIS is it equal? Yeah.
It's not PHYSIS. I thought we were going to go with Levinas and poop. No.
When you show us the time travel projects and the diagram of bikes, and this is where it sort of bounces off of Thomas' comments. I find it much at the affective and aesthetic level as a somewhat Illichian, you know, aficionada. I tend to feel more compelled, right? But somehow the car aesthetics is something I have trouble relating to. So I'm just wondering if, like, how you relate to a different aesthetic or affective appeal than if we don't share your love of Rolls-Royce. How does it
not Rolls-Royce, just that particular model as a
motivates aesthetically and affectively the draw to the Rolls-Royce?
Yeah.
Can you say more on the aesthetic level? This is the
so it is that, well, there will be biographical reasons. Why would you be interested in that, not this? As in with any exposure, why did you become interested in philosophy? Oh, when I was a teenager, I read some Nietzsche. Oh, that was amazing, etc., etc. Yeah, that's a very good way to get into philosophy. In my case, it was science fiction movies. You know, I came to Nietzsche after the science fiction movies, and so it's always kind of mediated through popular mainstream materials rather than the classic route. Those again are the biographical contingencies of how did you get to there. Obviously, that's why I said how to lose an audience in one slide. When you put a car up, no matter, you know, oh, yeah, it's a car. It's a car. And we know what they mean for the environment, etc., etc. And I'm not going to, oh yes, but if it's a used car, that's better than a new car because, etc., etc. Lithium, the mining of lithium for electrical cars, etc. You can go all Freudian, yes, of course. It's a phallus replacement. It is a womb. It is a It is a safeguard. It is a gated community in your own car. It is a status symbol, of course, etc. As it was. I'm interested in the car because it was the most expensive car in the world, and now it is dirt cheap. It was regarded as exalted, and now it is regarded as one of the most ugly. And at the same time, I still think it's beautiful. There's all these contradictions in that particular car. Now, I'm going to say it's the only car. No other car could possibly fulfill that function aesthetically in terms of the brutalism of its design versus the expectations from a Rolls-Royce purchaser, etc., etc. There could be other cars, an Aston Martin Lagonda from 1976, if you're interested in that kind of thing. It happens to be that I know that stuff, but I also know Nietzsche and Laruelle and Bergson and so on. So what do you do if you want to motivate yourself to write something? And I can't ride a motorbike. I'd like to ride a motorbike, but I'm too fearful I'd kill myself very quickly. I'm sure of that. I do know how to drive a car, and I've always liked old classic cars. I do like some of the kind of cliches about them, that they smell of the old world. They are, when you get in, a kind of interestingly closed environment, like a sealed room that's been left untouched for 40 years, and you go in and it's like traveling back. It's like traveling back in time. That's what they're described as. But I want to philosophize about that more in terms of the materials I have ready to hand from Bergson or whoever, process philosophers in general, about, well, what is going on? At the same time as making, in a sense, a point about what would an actual time travel be? Because time travel back to June 8th, 3 o'clock, 1958, I think but there's a whole bunch of reasons why just that isn't the way it could ever work. It's inherently just nonsense. But my version is, I think, something that is tenable and thinkable and actually happens all the time. So we are always already time travelers in the different old things around us and the materialities and speeds of their durations. That's as good as time travel could ever get, in my view.
There is a participant in the Zoom room.
Oh, right. Super.
Okay, Arnab.
Thank you for the very engaging lecture, John. And I missed the first part of it, but the second part I heard, and it reminds me of three things. The first one is the metaphysics of the photograph. The second is a God's eye view of simultaneity in the philosophy of mathematics. And the third is the total work of art. The total work of art. The total work of art, the total work.
Something more?
Can you hear me? Hello.
We are listening. Yeah. We are trying to figure it out. What is your last sentence?
Or the middle one now. We got the total work.
The total work of art, exactly. So so these three aspects, these three things, the metaphysics of photograph.
Yeah, let's go with that. The metaphysics of photograph, very interesting.
Yes. So, the metaphysics of it mediates a sort of both the past and a sense of death. But it also has the authority of the now, like in Berkshire. The authority of the now that is past. It mediates that past, and also a sense of it's fragmented. It's not complete. Like it's a fragment of reality. It's a part. So I was thinking, how do you think of in the times we are living in, the post-digital landscape, digital cartographing of all of reality under the sun. This Promethean aspect of science, how do you see the fragment or the part, or as you said, time traveling through memory.
Okay.
How do you see this located inside, or in comparison to the Promethean aspect of digital mapping?
Okay, super. So yes, there's interesting things to say there about the ontology of the photographic image, for instance. And you can think of it as presentist in the following a certain line, Barth to Bazin in film theory, the presence of the photographic image, especially the moving image, as bringing a present and a past back into the present. I wouldn't necessarily call that the authority of the now again, but a certain kind of new type of presence. And I've written on Bazin, who was partly influenced by Bergson. And Bergson, we were talking about a kind of universe of images yesterday in the context of, I've forgotten, but of course, as I pointed out, Simondon, wasn't it? It was Simondon. Yeah, exactly. And Simondon famously doesn't talk about who influenced him, but Bergson said that first in chapter 1 of Man of Memory. And as the Deleuzians will all know, it's a universe. Yeah, he got it. Away we go. Figures. So nothing new under the sun. Yeah, so it's an ontology of images, but understood not as representations. They are already image and affect and material. And Deleuze brings that out, but it's there in Bergson. It's not one of his more monstrous readings. This is there for sure, and what in his weirdest book, Matter of Memory. And in that first chapter, the way in which images interfere with each other, refract each other, generates the discrete perceptions of the world and the phenomenology of the world. From an ontology of image, we get the phenomenology of representation. And the subject and all the rest of it in a kind of monadology of images. And then you can take that along. Now, in terms of the digital realm, yes, that's a kind of other type of level or layer of image production. But as we were, and I think one of your questions, Joe, was pointing at the substance. There are still maybe questions of substance and subject beneath. And when I still believe in the superiority of the analog and the analogical. The digital there'll always be a kind of remainder, a bit beyond the yes and the no, the pure and negative and positive. The number 0 was a terrible invention. I think we just take it away. But anyway, so you'd have to change maths, so what can you do? But yes, there is no absolute zero, absolute nothingness. And therefore, there is always the analogical, even at a certain finest scale. And now when it comes to the quantum, I don't know what to do with that, of course. But certainly in terms of the classic machine coding, the yes, no, that underlies the digital, we still have there, I think, a fringe of the analogical that then is the level at which the image production might be regarded as having its own material duration. It's not that the digital is pure immateriality. It too can be physicalized, but at a different, very fine scale up. But like it goes all the way down, so I don't want to worry about, we can't manipulate that level yet, but manipulation isn't everything. So yes, and yeah, will I move on? Took a word to go for.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
I think there's a possibility of machine subjectivity, like a haunted engine, like a mono drive, a self-driving programmed car.
Yeah.
And then we have like the intentionality of the machine versus the operator, like the drone. I've been obsessed with drones. There's like a drone over the beach that's been like tracking me. But anyways, like you're the operator of the Rolls-Royce versus like if there were like a techno Maoilearca, like if it was like
Extended
AI version.
That would be so. Yeah. So in as much as this interference of durations, let's say, or the material participation or extended memory embodiment thing that's going on there, it isn't because this notion of the part, it's partial. It's never like a full projection, a full anthropomorphic. Oh, the car is now haunted, like Christine in the Stephen King. It's a monster in that way, or nor is it an angel. But inasmuch as it is a gathering of materials that interfere. Literally, the engine is, by the way, called an interference engine on a normal V8 in a Rolls. The pistons and the valves that do funny things. Do they set up a harmonious organic unity, to talk in traditional aesthetic terms, such that you might say it has its own life? That would be the kind of rather, what's the word, spatializing and completist a notion of the subject. But if everything's already partial subject to it, including ourselves, it's a matter of more or less. It's degrees between, as I said, this so-called hyperbolic and the normal, or etc. So that the car is a partial subject, but it's not like me. It is, that would be anthropomorphic in that way. A little bit of anthropomorphism is absolutely necessary, but I think that's necessary for all interaction. We give each other the benefit of the doubt and charity all the time in interpreting, etc., that you were a bit like me in that kind of idiosyncratic anthropomorphism.